The last time I made a video like this, I provided you my favorite roller coasters from the 90s. Well, now it's time to move over into the new millennium. The 2000s were one of the most influential years for roller coasters. It's the birthplace of our modern roller coasters. Manufacturers were trying newer, crazier concepts to entice the public. Before we get to my list of favorite roller coasters from the 2000s, please do me a favor and click on that like button. Newcomers who love everything roller coasters and theme parks, be sure to subscribe. 2000. It was the beginning of the new millennium, and many theme parks were looking for ways to make a grand splash to start off the century. Many parks brought on their record-breaking attractions like Kraken over at SeaWorld Orlando. It wasn't the first floorless roller coaster, but it has become one of the most recognizable ones by the general public. Lake Compounds opened a crazy fly-through-the-woods wooden coaster with Boulder Dash. Hershey Park opened a racing wooden roller coaster called Lightning Racer. However, the most important new roller coaster to open this year would have to be Millennium Force over at Cedar Point. This was the first time we had a continuous circuit roller coaster break the 300-foot height mark. Thus, the park touted it as the tallest and fastest continuous circuit roller coaster on the planet. It only held onto this record for a few weeks before Steel Dragon 2000 stole that title, but nonetheless, Millennium Force is the original Giga Coaster and still has a rabid fan base. With that said though, this isn't about the most important, but my favorite, and that title belongs to none other than Superman the Ride over at Six Flags New England. I may not have scored my first ride on this legendary roller coaster until 2019, but it only took one ride to realize what all the hype was about. This roller coaster has amazing airtime, long ride time, and overall decent forces. The downside is of course the brick lap bars, but if you can look past this one downside, you will see that Superman the Ride is still one of the best roller coasters on our planet. 2001. How do you follow up to an amazing year of roller coasters? Well, sometimes you can't quite keep up, but these roller coasters sure gave it their best shot. Nitro over at Six Flags Great Adventure was the first hypercoaster by B&M to not utilize the pre-drop, marking the start to their more modernized layout and improvements. This roller coaster features lots of great airtime hills and a powerful helix. Two other coasters, though not my favorite, Wildfire at Silver Dollar City. It's a decent looping coaster with only a little headbanging. Incredicoaster, I haven't ridden this attraction since the rename, but California Screamin' was a decent coaster with a long ride time. Unfortunately, the forces on this ride were rather tame, thus being at a Disney park. My favorite coaster has to be from my home park of Kennywood with Phantom's Revenge. I mentioned Steel Phantom when I discussed the roller coasters from 1991, but I knew this ride wouldn't get its due until we reached 2001. This is a fantastic hypercoaster that has an unorthodox layout filled with quick pops of ejector airtime. The second drop is where this coaster hits its max height and speed, dropping down into a valley while piercing through Thunderbolt. Phantom's Revenge continues to be a top-tier roller coaster and is a must-ride during every visit to Kennywood. 2002. I feel like the obvious answer for this year would be X2, but since that roller coaster was closed during my only visit to Magic Mountain, it will not make the cut. Next, there is Accelerator at Knott's Berry Farm, another great pick. Well, unfortunately, I don't have the best of luck when it comes to roller coasters in California, because this coaster was closed twice during the week I was out in California. It's crazy because if I simply left my plans alone, I would have been at the park on a Tuesday when the coaster was open, but oh well. There is also Batman the Dark Knight over at Six Flags New England. This is a smaller floorless roller coaster. It's not amazing or anything, but it's an overall solid looping roller coaster. My pick though is going to be Wicked Twister at Cedar Point. This roller coaster operated from 2002 until the fall of 2021. The ride was very simple, launching you forward and backward multiple times up two twisted vertical spikes. The ride was ultimately removed to make way for their renovation of the boardwalk section of the park. Also, Wicked Twister, from what I understand, used a ton of power for its LIM launch, so removing it probably would have been necessary for the renovation of Top Thrill Dragster into Top Thrill 2. 2003. Speaking of Top Thrill Dragster, let's get on to the following year. Before we get to my obvious winner of 2003, let's talk about a couple contenders. First, there was Greased Lightning at Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom. The coaster is no longer there and the park is under new management, but it was a fun, classic shuttle looping coaster. These shuttle coasters are becoming a dying breed. Thankfully, Knott's will be reviving their shuttle coaster Montezuma's Revenge, but yeah, a decent little coaster. Next, we have Superman Ultimate Flight at Six Flags Great Adventure. This is a nice, smaller sized flying roller coaster. This was my first ever flying roller coaster, and I do still enjoy this coaster, but it's not going to hold a candle to my favorite of 2003 Top Thrill Dragster. This hydraulic launch coaster took the world by storm by breaking two impressive records. It became the tallest and fastest roller coaster on the planet. The launch was truly exhilarating, taking you from 0 to 120 miles per hour in about 4 seconds. The coaster has now been redesigned into Top Thrill 2, which removed the hydraulic launch and replaced it with a shuttle launch using LSMs. As the release of this video, Top Thrill 2 has been operating with guests for a couple weeks, but I haven't scored my first ride on it yet. From what I hear, the launch may not be as powerful, but the multi-launch, including that crazy reverse spike, makes up for it. 2004. This was a great year for me as a coaster enthusiast. I finally took my first trip to Cedar Point and got to ride Millennium Force and Top Thrill Dragster. Then only a couple months later, we went to Hershey Park and I scored multiple rides on Storm Runner. Unlike Top Thrill Dragster, Storm Runner proved to be more reliable for a hydraulic launch coaster. Not to say it didn't have its downtime, but the park managed to keep it up and running a lot more. Plus, being on a smaller scale probably helped with the operations. Top Thrill would get shut down by a slight breeze as Storm Runner could keep on operating. Top Thrill had the better launch and greater speed, but Storm Runner made up with a better layout that included inversions. The most talked about element on this ride, and still one of my favorite inversions, would have to be the Flying Snake Dive. This is basically a zero-G roll that starts diving straight down a little bit over halfway through the roll. Storm Runner is my favorite for this year, but there are a couple other roller coasters worth mentioning. Thunderhead at Dollywood has continued to be a solid wooden coaster. Revenge of the Mummy at Universal Studios is a decent indoor roller coaster with great theming, decent layout, and nice forces. There is also Journey to Atlantis at SeaWorld Orlando and Nighthawk over at Carowinds. 2005. Another decent year for roller coasters. First up would be Kingda Ka, which snatched the title away from Top Thrill Dragster to become the tallest and fastest roller coaster on the planet. The speed title has been passed along since, but Kingda Ka continues to hold the title as tallest roller coaster, well, until Falcon's Flight finally opens, but that won't be for another year or so. Kingda Ka is a great launch coaster, but it does have a rattle, which is why I don't hold it in high regard like Top Thrill. There are also a couple other honorable mentions like Backlot Stunt Coaster at Kings Island. Then there is Hydra the Revenge over at Dorney Park. I've always liked its unique layout, but the headbanging keeps me from riding this coaster more than I would like. Finally, my favorite coaster of 2005, SheiKra at Busch Gardens, Tampa. I remember looking at other dive coasters around the globe, but finally here in 2005, here in the US, we would be getting our own, and it would be the tallest, fastest, and longest dive coaster on the planet. It was also the first dive coaster to feature an inversion, a giant Immelman, which would become a staple element for this model as basically every other dive coaster built features this inversion. In 2005, I managed to get down to Busch Gardens, Tampa, and got to ride this roller coaster many times. I probably rode SheiKra at least 10 times that day. I still consider SheiKra to be my favorite dive coaster. 2006. As I said, the 2000s were the golden years for roller coasters. Every year we got something new, even more impressive than the last. Well, 2006 was no different, and I'm here to gamble that many coaster enthusiasts will say that their overall favorite roller coaster came out of this year. Holiday World unveiled their massive wooden coaster, Voyage. Even though it didn't break any records with over 6,000 feet of track, Voyage was no wood coaster to trifle with. This ride still has its rabid fan base, many who will visit the park on a yearly basis to Hollywood Nights, their coaster enthusiast event where Voyage will operate trimless, creating a breathtaking once-in-a-lifetime experience. Goliath down at Six Flags Over Georgia is another entry into B&M's growing list of hypercoasters. I finally rode this coaster last year and realized what all the hype was about. The ride may be rough, but the airtime is legit. Tatsu out of Six Flags Magic Mountain is another flying roller coaster touted as the tallest, fastest, and longest flying coaster of all time. The ride has a massive pretzel loop that is arguably the most intense inversion out there. Disney unveiled the most expensive roller coaster with Expedition Everest. It's clearly not going to win my favorite award, but it's a solid family coaster that deserves a shout out. Finally, we come to the best coaster of 2006, which is no surprise to many of you, El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure. I had no idea what I was getting into when I rode this roller coaster for the first time in 2007. El Toro revived my lagging passion for roller coasters with just one ride. I was addicted all over again. The airtime was insane. I never knew that a roller coaster could be this good. It's a shame though that the ride hasn't been holding up as well these past years, but I'm hoping this coaster gets a good refurbishment and brings El Toro back into its glory days. 2007. Without beating around the bush, my favorite roller coaster of 2007 is of course Maverick over at Cedar Point. Because of the problematic Heartline roll that needed to be removed, I missed out on Maverick in 2007 and I would have to wait another 5 years until I would get my first ride on this legendary attraction. To this day, Maverick holds up as a solid multi-launching blitz coaster, featuring a beyond vertical drop, snappy turns, airtime, incredible pacing, and inversions. This is the making of a great roller coaster. Even though Maverick easily wins as best coaster of 2007, there are a couple other coasters worth mentioning. Mystery Mine at Dollywood is a heavily themed Eurofighter model by Gerstlauer. It has a rattle, but the theming and storytelling is top-notch. Finally, Griffin at Busch Gardens Williamsburg is basically a rendition of SheiKra, but being just a little taller and adding an additional Immelman. Oh, and the ride features larger trains that hold 10 people in one row. 2008. After a slew of amazing years for roller coasters, 2008 was a little more toned down. We still had some larger additions like Dominator, a relocated floorless roller coaster to King's Dominion, Possessed, another relocated suspended shuttle coaster, basically a smaller version of Wicked Twister. Ravine Flyer 2 is a solid wooden roller coaster, but it's been a few years since I've been on it, so it's kind of hard to rank. Finally, my favorite of the year, Fahrenheit at Hershey Park. This roller coaster has been slowly growing on me. I think my rides in 2023 were the best yet. This vertical lift beyond vertical drop roller coaster by Intamin Amusement Rides is like their version of a Eurofighter coaster. The ride can get a slight rattle, especially during the Cobra roll, but the ride has a slew of excellent elements from the Norwegian loop, beyond vertical drop, and corkscrews. 2009. Okay, we come to the final year of the decade, and what better way to finish it off with a duel of sorts. On one side, we have Manta, a flying roller coaster at SeaWorld Orlando. On the other side is Diamondback, a hypercoaster at Kings Island. Both roller coasters are great in their own regard. Manta is butter smooth, has excellent elements, and great interactions with the scenery, including that splashdown effect near the end of the ride. Diamondback is a hypercoaster that features the longer B&M train, so if you're riding in the very front or back, those airtime moments will be epic. Because I prefer airtime, Diamondback will be my favorite coaster of this year. This is such a tough one though, because both roller coasters couldn't be more different from each other. In the end, these are two great coasters by B&M. Well, that's going to do it for my favorite coasters by year in the 2000s. Next time, I will talk about my favorite coasters of the 2010s, and I can't wait to get to that list. That is going to be a tough one for sure. Until next time, this is X Screen Thrills.